Have you ever tried to get in shape? I have, many times. I've decided so many times to start running every morning. And every single time, I remember how much I hate running. And I do it for 1 or 2 days. I get up, I go for the run, but on the third day, I just can't be bothered to get out of bed. I'm just like, I'm done. This is too much. And I quit. But a couple months later, I have the idea, hey, I should start running every morning. And I do the same thing over and over again. It isn't the action of running I don't like. It's the goal. I would rather do a team sport like basketball or hockey or something to get my exercise. Because getting into shape for the sake of getting into shape just isn't a big enough objective for me. Marriage can be like that too. We like the action of being in a relationship, right? But just the goal of being in a relationship isn't enough to keep you in a relationship. And what at first seemed like a really great plan, like we were head over heels in love with someone, turns out to be something that we just can't be bothered to get out of bed for. In Ephesians 5, Paul outlines what marriage is actually supposed to be like, what a relationship is supposed to mean. That it's about value and unconditional love. Part of loving someone is knowing that we can't do it perfectly, that we will mess up. But shouldn't that kind of clue us in to something here? Shouldn't that kind of tell us that loving someone is actually something that's going to take work? It's like training for a marathon. I can't get off the couch and just expect to run a marathon because I signed up for one. I have to put the time and the training in so I can run the marathon. Not that I really would because, not a fan of running. But let's say I was, right? And even after I ran the marathon, I still wouldn't have mastered the marathon, right? I have to keep training in order to get better at running marathons. In Ephesians 5:24, Paul says, "Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives in everything submit to their husbands." And then over in 28 and 29, Paul says, "In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church." I just want to make sure that you catch some of the parallels here. There is Christ loving the church, and the church submitting to Christ, and husbands loving their wives, and wives submitting to their husbands. And this is important to understand, remembering that submitting and loving is essentially the same thing, right? It's vulnerability, it's serving each other. But we need to understand that Christ is perfect and Lord, and husbands aren't perfect and definitely aren't Lord. This is a picture, and it isn't about making a spouse subordinate to the other. This is about an incredible relationship that is meant to reflect the covenant that Christ made with the church. And so it says, husband, love your wife as your own body. When we try to learn something new, we don't do it perfectly at the start, do we? We have to train ourselves to do it once and then train ourselves to do it better. But often we view marriage as a contract, something that where if it doesn't work out, then it just doesn't work out and we just kind of move on. But that doesn't really sound like a relationship at all. But this is how the world sees marriage. We love someone until they mess up or we get bored, and then our contract is voided with them, and we leave them stranded. This isn't a relationship I want to have in any situation. If I was trying to catch a ball and my hand missed it, I wouldn't cut my hand off because it let me down. I would learn to catch the ball better. Marriage is not a contract to be broken. It is a covenant to be kept. We love our body by investing in it and valuing it. And we grow our marriage also by investing in it and valuing it. You're supposed to love your wife as you love your body. This means that if you wouldn't treat yourself in a certain way, you shouldn't treat your wife in that way either. Marriage is an unconditional promise to love now, to love always, and to love stronger. It is one where we grow in love with each other and together grow in love with God. Like putting time in to train and hone your body, we have to put the time in to make our marriages better. Investing in them, valuing our spouse in them, and focusing them on God. This verse says, "For no one ever hated their own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it." Nourish means to feed or to give what is needed to live and function. And cherish means to value and see worth beyond actions. Husbands, you are to give your wife what she needs to answer God's call in her life. You are to nourish her. And you are to see her and treat her with equal worth as a fellow bearer of the image of God. You are to cherish her. This isn't about meeting the requirements of a contract. This is about serving and supporting your wife in a covenant. You know, a body needs good food in order to thrive, and so does your marriage. Your growing love for your spouse should propel you to serve them so they know their value in your eyes, so they know their value in God's eyes, and they are supported to respond to God's call in their life. So they are supported to respond to God's call in your marriage. When you're in a covenant relationship with your spouse, you don't give up. You keep pressing forward, side by side, hand in hand, towards Christ. And you're to do this just as Christ loves the church. Verse 29 says, "Nourish and cherishes it just as Christ does the church." Christ feeds us, equips us, empowers us, and died for us. It is through his word and his work that we know our value, that we know our mission, and that we are equipped to live and function in it. Christ was the first disciple maker. Christ is our nourishment, and he defines our value because he is the incarnation of God's covenant to his children. Isn't that incredible? This is the perspective that a husband needs to see and support his wife from. And we play a supporting, equipping, empowering, and sacrificial role for her. Christ loves the church. And so the church has to be in submission to Christ. That is our response. In verse 24, the first part of it, it says, "Now as the church submits to Christ." The church has to die to its own preferences and desires to live for Christ, and it does so by submitting to Christ, and then in Christ finds real life. This is where we really find out why God made us uniquely. Christ doesn't squash our value or disempower us to function for him. His love wants to see us prosper. Christ amplifies what is already there, what he has gifted us with, and what he has created us to be. There is a covenant marriage between Christ and the church. It is one that forgives. It is one that is committed. It is one that is full of unconditional love. And the church's response to this is submission, an act of love on their part, on our part. So like the church submits to Christ, verse 24 also says, "So also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." You know, it'd be easy to read this verse and see that kind of subordination problem, right? if I didn't already know the command that the husband has to love his wife as he loves his own body, and the submission that Paul talks about here is a circular one. A husband loves his wife as a willful act of submission, and a wife submits to her husband as a willful act of love. It's like when you take two mirrors and you put them face to face, and neither one reflects itself, but both are reflected. And each one reflects the other, and together they kind of become one reflection. You know, if we are reflecting the image of God in our own lives, then together with our spouse, as one image, we should also be reflecting the image of God. As Christ teaches the church to be one church, he also teaches us to be one flesh. And as one flesh, as one reflection, we learn how to amplify our spouse's uniqueness, not squashing or disempowering them, but nourishing and cherishing them. This is what it means to be in a marriage covenant, that our lives together are running after Christ. And we are loving each other and serving each other and supporting each other through trials and triumphs and the tediousness of relationships. And that we will, to the best of our ability, always seek to serve our spouse in everything, and always seek to do it in a way that honors them and honors God. There is sacrifice, love, and submission here. Marriage is not a contract to be broken. It's a covenant to be kept.